Hey guys, tonight we step into a house shrouded in silence, its windows like dark, watching eyes against the snowy stretch of Long Island winter. It's December 1975, and the cold bites deep into the sleepy town of Amityville. But it's not just the chill that creeps beneath the floorboards, there's something else. Something older. Something that remembers. You hear the groan of the floor as someone or something moves upstairs long after everyone's asleep. The basement smells wrong, like stagnant water and copper. The air feels heavier the deeper you go. A fly buzzes in the dead of winter. You wake up at 3:15 a.m. and something's watching you, but nothing's there. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue stood quiet beneath the gray sky. Snow lined the rooftop, covering the high-pitched gables like a shroud. The bare branches of the maple trees out front clawed at the wind, and the boathouse at the back groaned where the canal met the frozen water. George and Kathy Lutz arrived just after noon. The moving truck pulled up, slow tires crunching across the snow-dusted driveway. The driver stepped down, took one look at the Dutch colonial's steep, looming facade, and muttered, "Looks bigger than it did in the photo." George smiled, too polite to agree, too eager to believe they'd found a bargain. "It's got history," he said, reaching for the back of the truck. The driver raised an eyebrow. "You could say that." Inside, the air was stale, cold even with the heat already turned on. Kathy rubbed her hands along her arms as she stepped into the foyer, her boots clicking against the wood. Her breath fogged for a moment. "Maybe the vents are blocked," she said. George didn't answer right away. He was staring up the stairwell, eyes tracing the banister, the shadows near the second-floor landing. It felt like someone had just walked past, but it was empty. They moved in with the kids, Daniel, Christopher, and little Missy, 2 days before Christmas. The rooms filled quickly with boxes, blankets, the scent of cinnamon candles. Laughter echoed off the walls as the children ran through the halls, calling dibs on bedrooms. Missy chose the one with the odd window, a quarter-moon shape that faced the backyard. She said an angel lived in her closet. Neither George nor Kathy paid much mind. Kids had imaginary friends all the time. By the fourth night, the mood had shifted. George woke up just after 3 a.m. His heart was racing, his skin damp with sweat. The room was still. The moonlight filtered through the window, illuminating Kathy's sleeping form beside him. But something had pulled him from sleep. Something more than a bad dream. A sound, low, droning. He slipped from the bed and moved toward the stairs. The house was silent, but his steps felt loud. He paused at the top, his hand resting on the wood railing, eyes locked on the landing below. The shadows looked darker tonight, thicker. The hallway beyond the front door was swallowed in black. He thought about turning back, but the sound came again, buzzing like a cluster of flies trapped in a jar. And it was coming from the sewing room. He stepped down, slowly. The door to the sewing room was closed. He reached out, turned the knob, and opened it. Flies everywhere, crawling along the window panes, humming in the corners, thick on the lampshade. The room reeked like something had died days ago and been left to rot. But there was nothing. No carcass, no spill, no reason. George shut the door hard. In the morning, the room was empty again. Not a single fly remained. He didn't tell Kathy. Not yet. Instead, he tried to shake it off. Told himself he was imagining things. The stress of the move, the cold, the money. But that night he woke again, 3:15 on the dot, every single time. And down the hall in the dark, he thought he saw a figure pass by the open bedroom door. A tall shape, barely outlined in the shadow. No footsteps, no sound. He rushed out, but found nothing. Just the faint creak of the attic above, and the smell of cold air pressing in beneath the doors. Back in bed, Kathy stirred beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you hear that?" George froze. "Hear what?" A voice. In the hallway. It said. She hesitated. "What did it say, Kath?" Her eyes blinked slowly. It said, "Get out." George lay back in silence. He didn't sleep the rest of the night, and the house just watched. The snow fell harder the next day. Thick, soundless flakes drifted across the windows like veils softening the sharp lines of the Dutch colonial. Inside, the house felt unusually warm, almost humid. Kathy noticed at first the way her shirt clung to her back as she folded laundry, how the kids' cheeks flushed even though the thermostat hadn't changed. She turned down the heat anyway, but the warmth didn't leave. It clung. George spent most of the day in the basement, trying to make sense of the boiler system. He crouched low with a wrench, eyes narrowed at the hissing valve, sweat beating across his forehead, even in the dank chill of the cellar. The air down there was strange, heavy, like it didn't want to be breathed. And behind the boiler, the far corner of the basement wall looked different. The bricks were uneven, off-color, as if someone had tried to seal something in, not keep something out. When he knocked against it, the sound was dull, not hollow, like the wall didn't want to echo. That night, Kathy had a dream. She was walking through the house, but everything was wrong. The walls were dripping, not water, but something thick and dark like oil. The wallpaper peeled back in strips, and beneath it faces, screaming, eyeless, locked in mid-silent wail. She turned to run and found herself in the children's room. The cradle rocked by itself. A child's voice whispered in her ear, "Don't wake him." She bolted upright in bed, her scream caught in her throat. George was already awake, sitting on the edge of the mattress, head bowed, hands trembling. "You heard it?" she asked. He nodded but didn't speak. The next day, the priest arrived, Father Mancuso. He was a quiet man, heavy-set with kind eyes and a sense of urgency beneath his calm. Kathy had asked him to bless the house, a formality mostly, for peace of mind. But the moment he stepped inside, he paused. The foyer was cold, colder than outside, and it smelled faintly of mildew and something else. Sweet, rotten, like perfume left in a sealed coffin. He moved from room to room, sprinkling holy water, murmuring soft Latin phrases under his breath. Everything was routine until he entered the sewing room. As he stepped through the doorway, something struck him, invisible, hard. He staggered backward, clutching his chest. The air had changed thick with pressure like the center of a storm. And then the voice came, low, sharp, a hiss. "Get out." He turned and fled, stumbling down the stairs. He didn't tell the Lutzes what he heard, just made an excuse about feeling ill and left without finishing the blessing. Back in his rectory, he developed a fever. Blisters formed on his hands. He tried calling George the next day, but the phone crackled with static. No voice came through, only a burst of high-pitched squealing, and then a whisper, distorted and low. "You've been warned." Meanwhile, at Ocean Avenue, the days blended. Missy continued talking to her imaginary friend Jody. She said Jody had red glowing eyes and lived in the closet. She said Jody was sometimes sad and sometimes angry. And once she said Jody could fly. George became withdrawn. He stopped going to work. Spent hours chopping wood for the fire, though they had more than enough. His eyes grew sunken. His beard grew wild. He was always cold now, even when the house wasn't. Kathy tried to talk to him, but his answers were clipped, his temper short. He would stare into the fireplace for hours, unmoving eyes reflecting orange like coals. She asked him once if he was okay. He said, "It's the house. It's not letting me sleep." That night the walls bled. Not blood. A thick green slime oozed from the keyholes, from the baseboards, from the cracks in the tile. It dripped slowly, rhythmically, like breath. The kids screamed. Kathy scrubbed, but it didn't smear, it vanished. Gone by morning like a dream left behind in the sheets. But George remembered. He stood at the top of the stairs, hand on the banister, staring down at the front door. "We shouldn't be here," he whispered. Kathy asked him what he meant. He didn't answer. And behind them, The attic door creaked open on its own. Just a little, just enough to let something slip through. The attic always felt like it held its breath. Not in the obvious way. There were no sudden drafts, no footsteps echoing when no one was up there. It was subtler than that. A stillness that clung to the wood like frost. Dust never quite settled. Light never quite reached the corners. Even when the bulb was on, the shadows looked deeper than they should have been. George began going up there more often. He didn't know why. Sometimes just to stand, sometimes to sit in the corner beneath the window that looked out over the boathouse and the canal beyond. It was always quiet up there except for a soft creaking sound that came and went like rope swaying gently against wood. But there was no rope. Not anymore. It had been removed after the murders. The murders. No one said it out loud in the house, but they all knew. The DeFios. A year ago, almost to the day. 6 bodies, all face down, all shot, and not a single neighbor had heard a sound. It hung over them like smoke, visible only when you turned a certain way, but always in the air. George found himself dreaming about them now. Not of the violence, of the silence. Walking through the house in his sleep, feeling their absence like heat on his skin. He began sleeping less. He stopped shaving. He spent hours just staring out the attic window, watching the boathouse light flicker on at odd hours, even when he was sure he'd turned it off. One morning, Kathy woke to find him standing in Missy's room, unmoving, just watching her sleep. When she touched his arm, he flinched like he didn't recognize her. "I was checking," he muttered. For what? His eyes were bloodshot. She was breathing. Downstairs, the sewing room began to smell again. Even with the windows open, even with air fresheners, there was something underneath sickly sweet and sour, like spoiled fruit left in heat. George tried scraping the wallpaper, convinced mold was to blame. But beneath the paper, the plaster was pristine. No rot, just something wrong. Kathy tried keeping the kids busy board games, baking anything to distract them from the way George drifted through the halls like a ghost. She found herself jumping at small sounds, a thump. From upstairs, the sudden crash of a dish sliding off the counter doors that opened slightly, then closed again without breeze or hand. One afternoon, while folding sheets in the master bedroom, she found a dark stain at the center of the mattress. She hadn't seen it that morning. It hadn't bled through the blanket. It was just there, warm to the touch. She stripped the bed in silence, heart pounding. That night, the banging started. First from the walls, then beneath the floorboards, then, unmistakably, from within the plumbing itself. Pipes clanged in rhythmic bursts. Faucets hissed steam even when turned off. The toilet flushed on its own. At 3:15 a.m., George woke in the basement. He didn't remember going down. His hands were muddy. There was dirt under his nails. A small pile of soil sat at the far end of the room, right by the off-color wall, in the corner. The one that always felt wrong. Now it looked wrong too. Something was bulging from behind the brickwork. Not visible, not quite, but a pressure, like the wall wanted to breathe. He backed away slowly, knees weak, and nearly tripped on the boiler's edge. The air stank of sulfur and old rot. Upstairs, Kathy woke to Missy's voice. She was speaking to someone, not in a playful tone. It was low, conversational. A pause, then a giggle. Kathy stepped into her room. Missy was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her back to the door, her doll clutched tightly in her arms. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" "Jody. Is Jody your friend again?" Missy turned. Her eyes were wide, too wide, and her voice came out flat. "She says Daddy wants to hurt us." Kathy knelt beside her. "Why would Jody say that?" Missy leaned in, lips near her mother's ear. "She said the house told him." The window slammed shut on its own. The glass didn't crack. But the doll in Missy's hands was wet with something red, and it wasn't paint. Kathy didn't sleep after that. She lay in bed, eyes wide, holding Missy against her chest, while George paced the hallway just outside the door. His footsteps were uneven, like he couldn't decide whether he wanted to walk or stop. Every few minutes, they would pause, long, heavy silence pressing in, then start again, slower this time. She didn't call out to him. Something in her gut said not to. In the shadows of the room, the crib stood motionless. But Kathy kept glancing toward the closet door, half expecting it to open again, half expecting Jody's glowing eyes to blink from within. When dawn came, it brought no relief, only light that seemed thinner, less warm. George didn't come down for breakfast. The boys asked where he was. Kathy said he was working in the basement, but she hadn't heard the door open all night. When she finally crept downstairs, the basement door stood ajar just enough to show the edge of the first step. The air leaking out was cold, despite the boiler groaning low in the corner. She didn't go down. Not yet. Instead, she turned to the living room and froze. The crucifix that had hung over the fireplace was upside down. The metal hooks were intact. The nail was firm, but the cross had turned. The figure of Christ dangled inverted arms outstretched toward the ceiling. She grabbed it with shaking hands, felt its warmth not from sunlight, but as if it had been held tightly. She hung it back properly, fingers trembling. But the moment she stepped away, a bang rang out upstairs, then another, then a scream. She ran. The boys were fine, but Missy's room was ice cold. Her breath puffed visibly in the air as she sat calmly on the bed brushing her doll's hair. "She's angry," Missy said without looking up. "Who is sweetheart?" "Jody." "Why?" Missy looked up, her eyes flat and gray. "She doesn't like the cross." That evening, George finally emerged from the basement. His eyes were glassy, his skin pale and slick with sweat. He didn't speak at first, just sat by the fireplace and stared at the unlit logs. Then softly, "There's a room down there." Kathy stopped. "What?" "In the basement, behind the wall. The bricks are fake. I pulled one out." "What did you see?" He didn't answer, only blinked. "There's red paint everywhere. But I don't think it's paint." She approached slowly, crouched beside him. "You need to get out of that basement, George. You're not well." "I'm fine. You haven't been to work in 4 days." I said, "I'm fine." His voice cracked like ice. For a moment, something unfamiliar flashed in his expression, a tightness around the eyes, a sharpness to his jaw. Then it was gone, and he looked exhausted. Kathy took a deep breath. "I want to talk to Father Mancuso again." George didn't respond. Outside, the snow had returned, thick and swirling, blanketing the world in white noise. Inside, the walls creaked louder than the wind. That night at 3:15, the boathouse light came on again. No one was down there. George had locked the door himself. Still he went, slipping into his coat boots, crunching across the frozen back steps. He walked toward the canal, breath fogging the air. The door stood wide open. Inside, tools were scattered across the floor as if thrown. A faint dripping sound echoed from the rafters above. He looked up. Nothing. Then turned. Behind him, footprints. Not his. Small, barefoot prints pressed into the frost-covered concrete leading from the center of the room back toward the house. He followed them in silence. And when he stepped back inside, the door slammed shut behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. In the darkness, Kathy lit a candle. She turned slowly, sensing movement in the hallway. Not George. Too tall, too thin. Something that brushed the walls as it passed, like fingers dragging. She stepped back into the kitchen and gasped. The fridge door was open, and every shelf was empty. Every piece of food gone. In their place, rows of flies, motionless, silent, waiting. And from the stairs above came Missy's voice. "She's in the walls now." Kathy didn't move. She stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, the warm flicker of the candle in her hand doing nothing to dispel the dread that wrapped around her chest. The refrigerator buzzed softly empty, but for the slow, writhing movement of the flies. They clung to the shelves, to the glass, to the corners like spores from a rotten seed. The air smelled like copper and ammonia. She closed the door slowly, the soft click echoing louder than it should have in the silence. Above her, Missy's footsteps padded across the floor, light too steady, not the usual pattern of a sleepy child wandering after a nightmare. Kathy ascended the stairs quietly, her heart knocking in her ribs like a second set of footsteps. Missy's door was slightly open. The room beyond glowed faintly, not from a lamp or a nightlight, but from the quarter-moon window. Snowlight spilled across the hardwood floor like a sheet of silver mist. Missy stood at the closet, not facing it, talking to it. "I told her you didn't mean it," she said gently. "I said you just didn't understand." Kathy stepped in. "Sweetheart, who are you talking to?" Missy turned slowly. Her eyes looked older in the half-light gray, almost glassy. "Jody's not mad at me. She's just different now." Kathy felt her throat tighten. "Different how?" Missy tilted her head. "She doesn't have a face anymore." The closet door creaked behind her, but when Kathy lunged forward and flung it open, it was empty. Just rows of small dresses, a stack of old dolls, and a strange mark scratched into the wood along the baseboard, an inverted triangle inside a circle, dark and gouged deep. Missy didn't remember the conversation in the morning, or the symbol, but Kathy couldn't forget it. She went down to the basement, alone. The boiler rumbled low, sounding more like growling than heat. The scent of sulfur had grown stronger. She crossed the room, her footsteps echoing dull against the concrete floor, and found the off-colored bricks George had described. One was loose. She pulled it free. Then another. Behind them was an opening, small at first, then widening. A narrow crawl space that led deeper than it should. The walls were red. Not red paint, but something deeper, like the stone itself was bleeding. And there was a smell, like soil that had never seen light, like something buried. She didn't go further. Not yet. She sealed the bricks back into place with shaking hands and fled upstairs, scrubbing her arms at the sink, like something had touched her that she couldn't see. That night, George stood barefoot in the backyard. Snow gathered at his feet. He didn't feel the cold. His eyes were fixed on the attic window. A faint glow came from behind the glass, greenish, unnatural. For a long moment, he thought he saw movement. A figure in the window, watching him. He didn't blink, didn't breathe, just watched it watching him, until the glow faded, and only his own pale reflection remained. Inside, Kathy was on the phone. Father Mancuso's line rang and rang. No answer. Then on the sixth attempt, a voice picked up. But it wasn't the priest. It was a woman's voice, hushed, wet. "Too late," she whispered. Then the line went dead. The phone sparked and hissed in her hand. Later, when she went to unplug it, she found a streak of blood inside the phone cradle. She didn't tell George. Not yet. But when she lay in bed that night, she found 3 long scratches along her thigh. No blood, just red burning lines, as though something had reached out while she slept and touched her gently, like it knew her name. The mornings had stopped bringing comfort. Even with sunlight filtering through the kitchen windows, the house felt dim, like the brightness was being filtered through something old and sick. A veil of tension that clung to the corners. Kathy no longer trusted the mirrors. They always seemed a half-second behind her reflection. And sometimes when she passed them quickly, she'd catch something over her shoulder just for a moment before it vanished. The children had grown quiet. They didn't argue or laugh the way they used to. They whispered now. Especially Daniel and Christopher. Huddled together on the staircase or behind doorways, their voices low like they were afraid the house might hear them. Missy, for her part, kept drawing pictures. Strange ones. Crayons scratched hard into paper goats. With human eyes, the house floating above the ground stick figures, sleeping while shadows crawled across their beds. But always in the corner, Jody, a small pig-like creature with glowing red dots where the eyes should be. Kathy found one of the drawings folded into her pillowcase. Underneath it, a single fly, still alive, crawling in slow, jerky circles. That afternoon, George disappeared. Not left the house, disappeared. Kathy searched every room, called his name down the hallways, out the windows, even into the basement. Nothing. It wasn't until an hour later that she found him, sitting cross-legged in the crawl space behind the bricks, eyes wide, hands covered in dirt. He didn't look at her, just stared at the wall. "George," she whispered, "what are you doing?" "I had to listen," he said slowly. They were calling, from the other side. His voice was flat hollow, as if spoken through water. She reached out for him, but the moment her hand touched his shoulder, his head snapped toward her. His eyes weren't right, not in color, in presence. It felt like something else looked out from behind them. "They want the children," he said. She pulled him out with everything she had, dragging him through the basement door and slamming it behind them. For the rest of the night, she kept the kids in her room, locked the doors, and pushed a dresser in front of the staircase. George slept on the couch, or at least that's what she told herself. But sometime around 3 a.m, she heard footsteps above her, heavy, pacing, and a deep thud like someone had jumped from the attic floor straight down into the hallway. She didn't move, didn't breathe, only held her children closer and whispered prayers she hadn't said in years. At dawn, she checked the hallway. George was asleep on the couch, his feet dirty mud caked beneath his nails, a faint line of red trailing from his right hand down to the wrist. When he woke, he had no memory of the night, just a dull ache behind his eyes. The next day, the priest called. His voice was rough, nearly a whisper, like his throat had been scraped raw. "You need to leave," he said. "Father, what's happening to us? It's not just the house. It's under the house. Something old. Something that feeds." She tried to ask more, but the line went dead again. This time, the cord melted in her hand. That evening, they tried to say grace before dinner. George muttered the words, but halfway through he stopped. He stared down at his plate where the mashed potatoes had turned black and slick, swarming with flies. No one else saw them, only George. He dropped his fork and stood. "I'm not hungry," he said, his voice barely above a breath. Upstairs, a loud slam echoed through the house. A bedroom door. Kathy rushed up the stairs, calling for the children. Daniel and Christopher were fine, but Missy's room was empty. The window was wide open, snow drifting in, and on the bed, a single hoofprint pressed into the blanket. Missy's voice came from the closet. She wasn't scared. She was singing. A lullaby Kathy didn't recognize, but one she swore she'd heard before, long ago, in her dreams. The melody echoed faintly in the small bedroom, delicate and distant, too delicate for a child's voice. Kathy froze outside the closet door, heart thudding against her ribs like fists on wood. The closet stood open by a hairline crack, the kind that invites your imagination to peer through. But she didn't need to look. She knew Missy was in there. She also knew she wasn't alone. "Missy," she called softly, her voice tight, trembling. The singing stopped. For a moment, only silence. Then slowly, the door creaked wider, revealing Missy crouched inside with her arms wrapped around her knees, eyes glassy and far off. "I'm okay," she whispered. Kathy rushed to her, gathering her daughter into her arms. "What were you doing in there?" Missy blinked slowly as if waking up from a dream. "She wanted me to hide." "Who, sweetheart?" "Jody." She said the man with the black face was coming up from the basement. Kathy's blood ran cold. She looked around the room, half expecting something to be standing in the corner. But it was empty. Still, the air was wrong, thick and buzzing like static. She carried Missy out of the room, heart pounding, and nearly ran into George on the stairs. He looked worse than the day before. Pale, unshaven, shirt clinging to his chest with sweat, even though the house was freezing. "I heard the singing," he murmured. "I think she's sleepwalking." "No," he said, "it wasn't her." She stared at him, searching his face for signs of the man she married. "I need you to tell me the truth, George. What's going on? What did you see in that crawl space?" He hesitated. For once he looked scared. "There's something behind the wall," he whispered. "It's not a room. It's older. It's waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For us to open it." That night George refused to sleep. He sat in the kitchen, the axe from the woodshed across his lap. He said it was for protection, but he wouldn't say from what. Every so often he'd glance toward the basement door, which they had nailed shut earlier that afternoon. The nails were still in place, but Kathy could swear she heard the door rattling, softly, as if someone inside was trying not to wake them. At 3:15 a.m. the power went out, not just in the kitchen, the entire house. Darkness swallowed everything sudden and absolute. Kathy woke in a sweat, the silence pressing down on her like a pillow. Then came the creaking footsteps overhead. In the attic, she shook George awake, but he was already sitting up, axe in hand. "Stay with the kids," he said, voice low. He moved slowly up the stairs, each step groaning beneath his weight. As he reached the attic door, the air grew colder, so cold his breath fogged the wood. He raised the axe and pushed the door open. The light from the hallway stretched inward like a probing arm, but it touched nothing. The attic was empty, except for one thing. A rocking chair in the corner, rocking on its own. It creaked softly, rhythmically, back and forth. George stepped closer, axe lowered but tense in his grip. As he neared, he saw something resting on the seat. A photograph, old sepia-toned. It showed the house, not how it looked now, but the same structure, the same steep gables. Only the photo was dated 1890, and standing in front of the house were 6 figures, 2 adults, 4 children. Their faces were blacked out, burned through deliberately. George's hands trembled as he picked it up. On the back, written in thick, childlike scrawl, were the words, "They never left." The chair stopped rocking, without wind, without touch. George backed away slowly, but before he closed the attic door, he turned for one last look and saw footprints, wet, bare, leading toward the back wall of the attic where no one had walked in weeks. He didn't follow them. Not yet. He would, soon. But for now, he returned to the stairs and noticed the house was warm again. Too warm. The kind of warmth that came from something breathing beneath the floorboards, something that had just woken up. The morning after the blackout, the house felt quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the hush of held breath, of something waiting. Kathy noticed it immediately. The way the floors didn't creak, the way the radiators no longer hissed. Even the usual whisper of wind beneath the eaves was gone, as if the outside world had retreated. George didn't speak. He moved through the house like a shadow eyes darting toward dark corners, flinching at sounds no one else could hear. Kathy watched him from the kitchen doorway, arms folded tightly across her chest, afraid to ask where he had been at dawn. There was mud on his boots. He hadn't left the house, not by the doors, but the attic window was open. Missy drew another picture. This time it was the family at the dinner table. Stick figures again smiling, except one. George's figure sat apart, scribbled entirely in black crayon, thick and heavy like a void. Above him hovered a red-eyed pig with wings made of bones. Kathy turned the paper over. On the back, written in block letters, Jody said he won't come back. That evening the walls groaned, literally. A low moaning sound rippled through the house, deep resonant like the slow turn of stone against stone. Doors opened by themselves, soft at first, then harder. One cabinet door flew off its hinge and shattered against the tiled floor. Flies returned, thousands of them, buzzing, swarming, in the sewing room, in the basement, in the light fixtures themselves. They clustered behind glass, their tiny bodies thrumming against the bulb until it burst with a crack and rained hot shards across the floor. The family stayed huddled together in the living room, wrapped in blankets, as the fire crackled low. No one dared turn on the TV. No one dared speak too loud. George sat at the edge of the hearth, staring into the flames. His eyes gleamed like the embers unfocused. He murmured something over and over. Kathy leaned closer. "What did you say?" He didn't blink. "The well is under the house," he whispered. "That's where it feeds." Kathy's skin crawled. "What well?" But he wouldn't say more. At 3:15 a.m. the phone rang. Just once. Kathy, already half awake, crept to the hallway and picked it up. Only breathing. Not hers. Heavy. Wet. A faint whisper. Then click. When she returned to bed, Missy was sitting upright in her sleep, whispering into the dark. "She's almost through," she said. "She just needs more fear." Kathy lay beside her, tears in her eyes, stroking her daughter's hair, and praying she'd forget it all when daylight came. But daylight brought something worse. The bathroom mirror was cracked in a perfect X. The toilets bubbled without flushing, and etched into the frost on the living room window as if by a finger. "Leave now!" Kathy looked at George, but George was no longer looking back. That afternoon, Kathy packed a suitcase. Not everything, just enough to leave. Just enough to escape for a few days. The kids' clothes, their toothbrushes, a few toys to keep them calm. She didn't even bother folding. Her hands shook too badly. She didn't tell George, not directly. She knew he wouldn't listen. Or worse, he'd insist on staying. He'd begun muttering in his sleep now, not words, but sounds, guttural, low, sometimes rhythmic, like chanting. It was getting harder to recognize the man she married beneath the gray skin and hollow stare. But Kathy had made up her mind. By nightfall, she'd have the kids in the car. She'd drive to her mother's, anywhere but here. The suitcase sat by the front door, unzipped, When Kathy returned from getting the boys' coats, it was empty. Every item inside gone. The suitcase still looked brand new, untouched, but everything inside had vanished. She stood there, breath caught in her throat, staring at it. Then the whisper came. From inside the walls, so close she felt it at her ear. "You're not taking them," she screamed. George didn't flinch. He was in the basement again. Hours later, Kathy descended after him. The children were in their rooms, unusually still, as though the house itself had sedated them. The basement was darker than usual, the bulbs overhead flickering like candles in wind. George stood facing the far wall. The bricks were gone, all of them. The crawl space yawned open deeper now, wider. It pulsed with heat. A reddish glow seeped from within, not light, but something else, something that felt alive. "I found the well," he said. His voice was calm, almost reverent. "It goes down forever." Kathy stepped back. "You need help, George. This house is—" "It's not the house," he interrupted. "It's what the house was built on." He turned. His eyes looked sunken, his pupils so dilated they swallowed the irises. There were scratches along his arms, fresh ones, red and angry. "I think I've been here before," he said, more to himself than to her. "In another life." Kathy didn't respond. She backed up the stairs, slowly closed the basement door, and slid the deadbolt into place. Then she turned every light on in the house and began packing again, this time, not just for the kids, but for all of them. She'd find a way to drag him out if she had to. But when she returned to the living room, the crucifix above the fireplace was missing again. In its place was a new item, a small bone, clean, polished, laid perfectly across the mantel like an offering. A child's tooth rested beside it. Kathy couldn't scream, couldn't speak. She simply turned off the lights and waited in the dark, clutching the children in her arms, listening to the house breathe. At 3:15 a.m., the door to the basement opened on its own. George didn't come out, but something else did. A cold breeze swept through the hall, thick with the scent of old earth mildew and something metallic. And in the silence, Missy spoke. She said, "We belong here now." Kathy didn't sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, cradling Missy, her arms aching but refusing to let go. Christopher and Daniel lay curled on the mattress behind her, too still, too quiet, like they were trying to disappear into the sheets. Outside, the wind howled, but it sounded less like a storm and more like a cry, long, low, and hollow, as if the earth itself was mourning. Downstairs, the basement door stood ajar. She hadn't touched it. She knew she had locked it. Still, it hung open now, just wide enough to suggest invitation. Just enough for something to crawl through. George hadn't returned. It was nearly morning. Kathy crept from the bed, pulled the hallway lamp into the bedroom, and stuffed towels under the door. She didn't care how irrational it looked. The house wanted them. It watched them. And she would make it work for every inch of her children. At sunrise, she ventured downstairs. George was in the kitchen, naked from the waist up back, covered in mud, breathing slow, and even as he sliced bacon into perfect strips. The skillet on the stove crackled with butter. He didn't look at her. "Breakfast," he said. Kathy stood still. "Where were you?" He placed the bacon gently into the pan. She wanted me to see what it looked like down there, what it remembers, what who remembers. He smiled faintly without warmth. The house. Kathy backed away, the floor creaking under her heels. That's when she noticed his reflection in the oven door. It blinked, but he didn't. Later that day, the air vents began to rattle, not just gently, but violently, as though something large was crawling through them. One by one, each vent cover across the house was blown out, screws clattering against the walls like hail. When Kathy checked Missy's room, the vent in the floor was bent outward. From the inside, Missy sat quietly in her rocking chair, petting the doll with its missing eyes. "She likes the tunnels," she whispered. She said they were made for her. That evening, George brought a box into the living room, a wooden crate, old and warped, bound in rusted iron bands. "I found it in the wall," he said. "No," Kathy said, stepping between him and the fireplace. "You're scaring the kids, George." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I haven't even started." He opened the crate. Inside were 6 small bones tied together with twine, and a faded page from a diary written in smudged pencil. Kathy snatched it, heart racing. The words were jagged, frantic. The ground must be fed. The spirits must rest. If not, this land will eat. Behind her, the lights flickered, then blew out. Total darkness. Missy giggled, and from the kitchen came the sound of dripping, not water. Thicker, slower, like blood from a ceiling. Kathy held her breath. George whispered from the shadows, "It's awake now." And the house for the first time smiled. Not in the way people smile, but in how the walls seemed to lean closer, in how the floor dipped under her feet, in how the basement door, long nailed shut again, simply disappeared, gone, as if it had never existed. Missy climbed into her mother's arms. "She wants to come upstairs tonight." Kathy didn't ask who. She already knew. The walls were breathing again. Kathy could feel it, subtle but unmistakable. A faint flex in the drywall, like lungs expanding and contracting behind the paint. The air was warmer, heavier. It carried a pulse, a rhythm, a heartbeat that didn't match hers. She tried to distract the kids with a game in the living room, anything to hold their attention. But even the television flickered oddly, showing static and flashes between channels they didn't turn to. Each time it glitched, the sound of distant whispers crept through, barely above a murmur, yet sharp enough to feel personal. George stood at the window, unmoving. He had been there for an hour. Kathy glanced toward him. "George, come sit, please." He didn't turn. "The priest is here," he said. She moved to the window beside him. The driveway was empty. "No one's there." He nodded. "Exactly." She opened her mouth to ask what that meant, but a loud thump shook the ceiling overhead. All three children jumped. Missy clutched her doll so tightly its plastic arm cracked. "It's the attic," Daniel whispered. Kathy bolted for the stairs, George just behind her. Each step creaked with a reluctance that felt alive. When they reached the landing, Kathy paused. The attic door hung wide open, the pull string swinging like a pendulum. She'd never opened it, never had to. The attic above was dark. Not just in shadow, but a darkness that seemed to consume the light from below. She turned to George. "Get the flashlight." He was already climbing the ladder. George waited, but he was gone, swallowed into the upper floor. Kathy waited below, straining to hear. Then, a soft scraping, wood on wood. Then, George's voice hollow and distant. "It's full of them." "Full of what?" Silence. Kathy gritted her teeth and climbed. The attic was ice-cold breath rising in plumes. The flashlight beam barely cut through the haze, and the smell, it was like rotting flowers and burnt hair. She found George standing in the far corner, surrounded by small wooden boxes. Dozens, all identical, labeled in cursive handwriting with names, children's names. Some boxes were open. Inside, each one, a possession, a tooth, a lock of hair, a button from a dress. And carved into the wood beneath them was the same phrase over and over. "To feed the house, we give what we love." Kathy backed away. George picked up one box. It had Missy's name on it. "Where did this come from?" Kathy snapped. He blinked slowly. "She brought it up here." No, she didn't. "This isn't real." But the box was warm, fresh, new. Kathy grabbed his arm, yanking him toward the stairs. "We're leaving tonight. I don't care what it takes." They didn't speak on the way down, but as they reached the bottom of the stairs, Missy stood there waiting. Her eyes were wide but not afraid. "She said you can try," she murmured. "But the house already knows." Kathy bent down, trying not to show fear. "Who, sweetheart? Who told you that?" Missy's lips barely moved. "The one in the floor." That night, Kathy tried to pack again. Again, the bags were emptied. Again, the basement door was open. And this time, footsteps echoed up from below. Not George's, not human. Wet, uneven, as if something dragged. She locked the bedroom doors, clutched her children, and pressed her head against the wall, listening. From within came the sound of a girl's voice, whispering to her, using her own voice. The voice on the other side of the wall mimicked Kathy with terrifying precision. Each whisper matched her cadence, her warmth, her breath. It spoke as if coaxing her children. "Come now. It's all right, sweetheart. Mommy's here." But Kathy was in the room holding them. The mimicry didn't stop. It grew more confident, louder, more inviting. Missy stirred. Her eyes fluttered, half-lidded. She turned toward the wall and began to rise. "No," Kathy whispered, gripping her tighter. "Stay here, baby. It's not me. It's not real." Missy's mouth trembled. "But she says she needs me." The bedroom doorknob began to turn. Slow, steady, a click, then another. George had locked it, but now it turned as though from inside the wood, like the knob itself was becoming undone. Kathy bolted from the bed, dragging a chair beneath the handle. Her heart thudded in her ears. She could still hear her own voice behind the wall calling sweetly, urgently. Then silence, until something pounded from the inside of the closet, one single thud loud enough to shake the window pane. Kathy stepped closer, her breath fogging in the cold. The closet light flickered on by itself. Inside, the dolls were facing the door. They hadn't been earlier. Each one looked up with painted eyes. All were missing their mouths. A new drawing sat at their feet, crayons scratched hard against paper. It showed the family standing at the edge of a pit, a massive black circle at the center of the house. Below it, figures reaching up, figures with familiar faces. George, Kathy, the children, all drawn as corpses, their arms outstretched, pulled into the hole. Kathy tore the paper apart. She didn't sleep that night. When the sun finally rose, she found George sitting on the stairs staring at the front door. "We can't leave," he said calmly. "I'm taking the kids," she replied, her voice shaking. Now, he looked up at her, the shadow beneath his eyes so deep it looked bruised. "You can't take them. They belong to the house now." Kathy moved quickly, packed bags, bundled the children. Missy cried, but softly. Daniel clutched his toy airplane like a talisman. Kathy dragged them into the car. The driveway was snowed in, deeper than it should have been. She shoved the gear into reverse anyway, tires spinning. George stepped onto the porch barefoot in the snow, watching them through the falling flurries. The engine stalled. She tried again and again. It wouldn't turn over. The lights on the dashboard flickered erratically. From the back seat, Missy whispered, "She says it's not time yet." Kathy turned to her. "Who?" Missy didn't answer. But from behind the house came a sound, a rumble, like shifting stone, like something large and buried stirring. The house watched them, not from the windows, but from every inch of it. Kathy could feel it pressing on her skin beneath her ribs, whispering, "You belong to me." She put the car in park and wept. That night, George sat at the kitchen table carving into the wood with a pocket knife, a new symbol, a spiral inside a triangle inside a hand. Kathy asked him what it meant. "It's a seal," he said, "to keep it down there." "Who taught you?" "The house." It was teaching all of them now. By morning, the house had grown colder again, but only in certain rooms. The temperature varied wildly from one step to the next, like walking through invisible curtains of air. Missy's room was a meat locker breath, visible in puffs. Kathy wrapped her in 2 blankets and moved her into the living room where the fireplace still offered some warmth. The flames burned high without wood. George hadn't touched it, neither had she, but it roared quietly, casting long shadows on the floor, dancing in a way that didn't match the flicker. Sometimes the shadows seemed to reach toward the children, stretching fingers across the carpet, pausing near their feet. The family tried to stay together in one room, tried to avoid being alone even for a moment. But the house was clever. It separated them without touching them. One by one it lured. Daniel followed the sound of his toy airplane, its wind-up motor buzzing softly in the hallway, even though he hadn't played with it in days. Kathy found him standing at the top of the basement stairs, arm outstretched, hand on the doorknob. When she called his name, he turned slowly and said, "He told me I dropped it." "Who?" The man with the stitched mouth. They boarded the basement door again, added salt across the threshold, but that night the dreams started. They came to all of them. Same dream, same voice, same place. A field, dead corn swaying under a black sky, windless. The house, standing alone in the distance, twisted and wrong, like a photograph burned at the edges, and something moving inside it, watching, always watching. George began talking in his sleep again, this time in Latin. Kathy recorded it, played it back the next day. The voice was not his, deeper, older. "Sacrificium ad domum, requiem in tenebris, ossa infantium mihi." Translation: sacrifice to the house, rest in darkness. The bones of children give them to me. Kathy called the priest again. She didn't expect an answer. This time someone picked up, not Father Mancuso, but a woman. Her voice was dry, brittle, like leaves crumbling. "You were warned." "Who is this?" Kathy asked, clutching the receiver. "She watches through the mirrors." The line went dead. That night, Kathy covered every mirror with blankets. Towels even taped cardboard across the larger ones. But at 3:15 a.m., the covers slid off, one by one, as if peeled back by unseen hands. And in each mirror, not a reflection, but a view into the house. Different rooms, different angles, and in all of them, George, standing still, staring back. Only he was in the room with her too, sleeping in the chair, and yet his mirror self smiled, and raised a hand, and waved. Kathy screamed. George didn't stir. The children cried out as the hallway lights exploded in a strobe of sparks, and from beneath the floorboards came the grinding groan of something massive turning over in its sleep. The next morning, Kathy awoke on the floor, unsure how she got there. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. The suitcase was back by the door, packed, zipped, waiting, and on top of it a child's drawing of a funeral, 5 coffins, and a house smiling behind them. The drawing didn't have names. It didn't need them. Kathy knew. She recognized the bows in Missy's drawn hair, the slouch in Daniel's shoulders, the way Christopher stood with his hands in his pockets. Even the 5th coffin, shorter, narrower, was unmistakably hers. The house grinned behind them, all windows like open eyes, the chimney, a crooked nose, the porch steps, jagged teeth. She crushed the picture in her hand and tossed it into the fireplace. But it didn't burn. The flames curled around it, hissed and recoiled as if rejecting it. She tried again with matches, then a lighter. The paper wouldn't char. Kathy didn't tell the kids. Not this time. They were already pale, skittish shadows of themselves. Christopher hadn't spoken since the closet incident. Daniel refused to be left in any room alone. And Missy kept humming to someone who wasn't there. George seemed strangely unaffected. He woke that morning and shaved, cooked breakfast, chatted absently about the snowstorm due on Friday, as though the last 3 weeks hadn't turned their lives inside out, as though the house wasn't feeding on them. When Kathy asked him what day it was, he smiled. We're almost there. Almost where? She's almost ready. Kathy stared at him, her hands trembling. Who, George? Who is she? The house, he said. She's been patient. That evening, Kathy found another door. Not in the basement, not in the attic. It appeared behind a bookshelf in the study, one she hadn't noticed before, because it hadn't existed before. An old warped wooden door stained dark with water or something thicker. No knob, just a keyhole. And above it, etched crudely into the frame, what is buried remembers. Kathy didn't open it. She couldn't. But the key appeared later on her nightstand, wrapped in her wedding veil. It reeked of sulfur and old soil. That night she left the door alone. But in her dreams she walked through it, down a spiraling stair made of bone, walls lined with fingernails and teeth, and at the bottom an altar. On it 5 candles, each one flickering above a photograph of her family. As the wind blew them out one by one, Kathy turned to flee, only to find the door had disappeared. She awoke screaming. George wasn't beside her. She found him standing outside barefoot in the snow, eyes closed, arms raised toward the roof of the house like he was praying to it. The sky above them churned with clouds. Thunder rumbled, but it wasn't from above. It came from beneath the earth. A warning, or a welcome. She dragged him inside. He said nothing. She pressed him into a chair and held his face between her palms. George, look at me. He blinked slowly. The house needs just one more thing, he whispered. What? He leaned forward, lips to her ear. To choose. The lights dimmed. The walls pulsed, and every mirror in the house shattered at once. In the aftermath of the mirrors shattering, the house settled into a tense, unnatural stillness, like the pause between lightning and thunder. Every sound seemed magnified. The soft patter of Missy's bare feet down the hallway echoed like footsteps in a cathedral. The ticking of the kitchen clock slowed, then stopped altogether at 3:15 a.m. Kathy swept the shards with shaking hands, cuts opening on her palms unnoticed. Each piece reflected something different. Not the room, not even the moment. Some showed rain pouring on a sunny day. Others flickered with movement. Children running rooms, burning shadows undulating in corners that no longer existed. One shard showed her face, but her eyes were gone. She dropped it instantly. The kids had stopped sleeping. They lay awake, wide-eyed, afraid of the dark, but more afraid of the light, because now the light moved. Bulbs dimmed when you walked by. Shadows bent toward you. Objects in full view disappeared when blinked at for too long. George, meanwhile, had become impossibly serene. He walked the house humming tuneless melodies. He whispered into the vents. He marked doors with salt and spirals, then wiped them clean with his sleeve. Kathy followed him one night, tiptoeing through the hallway after midnight. He slipped through the study and into the hidden door now left ajar. Inside was a narrow stone staircase, winding downward far deeper than the house should allow. She dared not descend, but she could hear him, speaking in that voice again. Not Latin this time, not English either. A language that sounded like wind pushed through old bones. She backed away, but the door didn't shut. It slowly creaked open, wider beckoning. That morning she found the study gone. The bookshelf had returned solid, full untouched. No door, no staircase, no sign the room had ever changed. Missy began drawing symbols again. Circles within circles, spirals with jagged ends, eyes without pupils. Kathy asked her what they meant. They're promises, she whispered. From who? From the house. It says I can stay forever. Kathy wrapped the drawings in foil, tossed them in the fire. This time they burned. But the flames hissed, curled green, and licked upward with angry tongues. Later that day, she found a drawing hidden in Missy's pillowcase. It was different. It showed Kathy sitting in a rocking chair, aged gray expression blank, surrounded by children with black eyes. At her feet, a dog with no mouth, and a baby with too many fingers. Missy had written beneath it in block letters, "This is after we stay." That night the doorknobs melted. Everyone dripped like wax down the frames. They were trapped, windows fogged with breath not their own. And somewhere below in the dark belly of the house, something laughed, low, rattling, triumphant, as if the final seal had broken. Kathy woke to silence, thick and smothering like a pillow pressed over the world. Her ears rang with the absence of sound. No wind, no birds, not even the usual creak of the settling house. It was the kind of stillness that felt watched. The children lay beside her on the living room floor, tucked in blankets, eyes open. None of them had slept. They stared at the ceiling. At the same corner, Kathy followed their gaze and froze. A crack had appeared, not just in the plaster, but in the shape of a mouth. A thin fissure curling at the ends like a grin. And it bled. A slow, dark seep of what looked like ink or oil oozing downward in a deliberate line. No one said anything. George was gone again. She found him in the master bedroom, standing in front of the mirror, one of the few unbroken. He stared into it, unmoving. "What are you doing?" she whispered. He didn't look away. "She's almost through." Kathy stepped closer. The mirror showed something else. Not the room. Not even George, but a version of him smiling, blood-streaked on his shirt eyes, hollowed out like a doll's. Behind him stood her, shadow made solid. Long arms, hair like smoke, fingers curved inward, twitching. Kathy recoiled. George blinked. "She's waiting for you." Later, when she tried to pack once more, the clothes were already folded, waiting, stacked neatly in the hall. Each pile labeled with their names, handwritten in ink that bled through the tags. No one claimed to have done it. She burned them. This time the fire screamed. That night, the basement door returned. It wasn't nailed shut anymore. It had no knob, just the keyhole again. The key reappeared on George's pillow. Missy reached for it in the dark. "No," Kathy hissed, snatching it first. But Missy only smiled. She already picked, the little girl whispered. "It's just your turn now." At 3:15, the door opened. On its own. Kathy didn't step back. She held the key, clutched a flashlight, and crossed the threshold. It wasn't the same basement. It was older, colder. The walls breathed, not metaphorically, truly. The stone exhaled damp air in long, slow gusts. Shapes moved at the edge of the light. Kathy turned toward the corner. A well stood there, its rim ringed with tiny handprints burned into the stone. Inside it, nothing. A depth that swallowed light. But when she leaned close, a voice came up from within. Not one. Dozens. Layered. Her mother's, George's, even her own. Begging. Whispering. "Choose, choose, choose." Behind her, the door slammed shut. Kathy spun around, flashlight beam trembling across the stone walls. The door had vanished again, just seamless wall now, as if it had never existed. Trapped, the basement pulsed with a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Slow, steady, ancient. She could feel it through the soles of her feet. Even her breath synced with it involuntarily. Inhale. Pause. Exhale. Pause. Thump. 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 She turned back to the well. The voices had stopped. Now there was only a sound like slithering silk. Something brushing the interior walls, rising slowly from the depths. The flashlight flickered, and then it died. Darkness closed in like a mouth. Kathy held her breath, fists clenched, willing herself not to move, not to feel. Then a whisper in her ear. Not from in front of her, from inside her. You are the key. Her body locked in place. She felt her arms lift, not by choice. Her hand opened. The key, the one from her pillow, had reappeared in her palm. Cold. Heavy. She didn't remember bringing it, but it was there, pressed between her fingers, burning. The well exhaled a breath so cold it burned her skin. And with that breath came images, not dreams, not memories. Warnings. A boy in the 1800s lowered into the same well on a rope, never pulled back up. A woman screaming in the attic while the walls bled symbols. A man in the 1920s hammering boards over every window, only to be found later with his eyes gouged out and placed neatly on the nightstand. And now Kathy, standing at the edge, in the center of it all, chosen. The well whispered again, a sound like a mother cooing to a child. You only have to give one. She backed away. No, she said aloud. You can't have them. The floor buckled beneath her feet. Cracks spidered through the stone, and something began to rise from the well. Not fast, patient, like it had waited centuries. A figure, long-limbed, faceless. Its skin was made of the house itself. Plaster wood, old paint scraps of wallpaper, and broken mirror. It moved without sound. Its limbs creaked like settling beams, and from where its mouth should have been came a sound, a child's cry, echoing and wrong. Kathy bolted, groping along the wall, searching for anything. A seam, a switch, a break in the illusion. And then her hand passed through. A soft spot. She shoved forward and fell out into the hallway upstairs. The kids were waiting. Christopher screamed when she reappeared from the wall itself. George stood at the end of the hall, arms open. She returned, he said gently. She knows now. Kathy clutched the children. We're leaving. Now. George didn't move. He only smiled. She's already in us, Catherine. This isn't a haunting. It's a becoming. The walls behind him split open, hair-thin cracks widening into jagged mouths, breathing. And Kathy realized the house wasn't collapsing. It was waking up. The house shifted beneath their feet. Not a tremor, a stretch like vertebrae cracking after a long sleep. The floorboards beneath Kathy and the children groaned in a wave, the wood bending in unnatural ripples. Missy screamed and buried her face in Kathy's coat. Daniel clutched her leg. Christopher was rigid, his eyes locked on George, who still stood at the far end of the hallway, arms out, smiling softly, like a priest at the altar. Kathy turned toward the stairs. They were gone. In their place was a wall, solid, smooth, no seams. She spun, searching for escape, but the hallway narrowed around them, the air thick with a metallic stench like rusted iron and wet soil. The wallpaper peeled on its own, revealing messages scratched into the plaster beneath. Be still. Be hers. Be nothing. And farther down, scrawled deeper, desperate. Don't let her pick. Kathy pulled the children into the bathroom and slammed the door. She flipped the lock, held her breath, a beat of silence. Then came the knock. Soft, delicate. Missy whimpered. It's the lady from the well. The door shook, not from the knock, but as though something was pressing its face against it from the other side. There were no sounds, only weight. Then the knock came again, only this time from inside the mirror. Kathy turned. The reflections were gone. The glass was black, not a void but a doorway. Shapes shimmered in its depth, shadows moving with purpose. One of them pressed its palm against the glass. It was a hand Kathy recognized. Her own, but thinner. Wrong. Her reflection was inside, trapped, eyes wide with terror, mouthing something, run. The mirror cracked. a single hairline fracture running diagonally across the center, then another, then it exploded outward. Kathy threw herself over the children as glass rained down around them, but none of it cut. Each shard landed perfectly. Each piece arranged itself on the floor, forming a spiral pointing toward the drain in the sink. The faucet began to drip, not water, but ink, thick black ink with something alive writhing inside it. George's voice drifted through the vents. She can't take us all. Just one. She only needs one. Kathy burst from the bathroom with the kids running toward the back of the house. The walls warped around her, the hallway twisting into a funnel. Doors multiplied, some upside down, some nailed shut, others breathing. The back door was still there, unlocked, waiting. She shoved it open and stepped out onto the front porch. Not the backyard, not escape. The house had looped on itself, like a throat closing shut. George stood on the lawn smiling up at the sky, which was no longer sky, but roiling black, spinning with stars that didn't belong to this world. "They're watching now," he said. "She's almost born." From behind the house sighed, and the roof began to split. The sound was low, like a groan traveling through bedrock, a sound ancient and vast, as if the earth itself were trying to breathe. The roof of the house opened in jagged seams, shingles peeling upward, like the mouth of a beast awakening from centuries of slumber. Splinters drifted down like confetti black against the swirling gray sky. Kathy backed away, holding the children close her breath, catching as she turned toward George. He didn't seem to notice her. He was kneeling now, arms raised face to the sky, mouthing words that didn't belong to any language she knew. Then the chimney cracked in half, and from it something slithered out. Not smoke, not fire, but a figure made of both tall coiling with a face that refused to take shape. 1 second, it was her mother, then her own. Then a blank canvas dripping with red tears. It floated weightless, a puppet made from the materials of the house timber bones, curtain skin eyes sewn from black nails. The air turned syrup thick. The children began to cough. Kathy could feel it too, something inside her resisting, clinging to the world, as if a great suction was pulling at their souls. The house wanted. It had been preparing. Every noise, every crack, every moment of fear, they had been part of its gestation. George's voice broke through the haze. "She will unmake us kindly. All she asks is a name." Kathy shook her head. "You're not choosing for us." He turned to her eyes gentle and said, "I already did." Missy stepped forward. Her doll was gone. Her hand was empty, but she stared up at the shape above the house like a child seeing a firework for the first time. She said, "I can be her forever friend," Missy whispered. Kathy grabbed her, pulled her back, heart racing. The shape recoiled. Then it laughed, a sound like a music box melting in fire. The sky cracked open in streaks of violet and ash, and from the hole above the house came the whispers again, an ocean of voices folding over each other. So many. Some were crying, some were singing lullabies, others simply repeated one word choose. The ground beneath Kathy's feet turned soft. Not mud flesh. She stepped back in horror. The lawn pulsed, veins visible beneath the surface. The house had spread its roots into the world. George looked up. "She likes you best, Kathy." Then his body rose from the ground, not lifted, but unmoored like a marionette on invisible strings. His mouth opened wider than it should, and from within came a second voice, one older than anything human. "She remembers you." George floated inches off the ground, arms dangling like broken branches, his head tilted unnaturally far back as the voice spoke through him, not through his mouth, but from deep inside like a radio tuned to some terrible, long-forgotten frequency. "She remembers your blood, Catherine. The soil drank it before." Kathy staggered back, her grip tightening on Missy and Daniel. Christopher clung to her waist, tears, silent eyes unblinking. The house groaned behind them, timbers, flexing eaves, creaking like ribs, stretching after a long hibernation. Kathy choked, unsure if she meant to ask, challenge, or beg. "What is she?" George's body twitched, the voice slithering out once more. "She was made from grief, fed by silence, grown in the bones of children." He lowered slowly, limbs stiff. When his feet touched the ground, his face changed, no longer vacant. He looked at her now, terrified, as if he had returned for just a second. "She's in me," he whispered, trembling. "Kathy, run." The moment shattered. The ground cracked beneath their feet. The porch splintered, one half collapsing into a pit of darkness that hadn't been there seconds before. Kathy screamed, pulling the kids back, but Daniel slipped, falling forward toward the edge. She caught him by the arm just in time, his foot dangling over nothing. Below was not dirt, not foundation. It was the same spiral staircase from her dream, descending into a lightless abyss. Far below, something was climbing up. The wood beneath her hands grew warm, then hot, as if the house were angry now, rejecting her resistance. "You can still choose," the voice cooed from all sides. "One soul, one child. The rest may leave." Kathy lifted Daniel into her arms. "I won't." The air thickened. Wind howled through the broken chimney. Shutters slammed open and shut like clapping hands. The sky turned the color of old bruises, and a sound, not quite a scream, not quite laughter, echoed through the bones of the house. George dropped to his knees. His eyes rolled white, and then he vomited black water onto the floor. It hissed, boiled, slid toward Kathy's feet like a thing alive. She ran. No plan, just motion. The house twisted around her rooms, connecting in new ways. The hallway stretched like taffy doors, vanishing behind her, the kitchen reappearing ahead again and again, like the house was looping her in an endless circuit. She turned sharply, shoving through the pantry, and found a door. The front door, still there, still shut. She kicked at it hard, again, once more. Then Daniel pointed behind her. Kathy turned and saw the mirror, the one above the entryway table. It wasn't shattered. It had never shattered. It was watching, and her reflection, it smiled, and unlocked the door from inside. The bolt clicked. The knob turned. The door creaked open. A blinding white beyond. Not light, not heaven, something else. Kathy stepped back, and the house whispered, "That's not outside. That's her." The light from the doorway spilled into the hall, like milk poured across a dark floor, too smooth, too bright, lacking any warmth. Kathy squinted, shielding the children behind her, her heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her teeth. The voice came again, soft and lilting from the threshold of the blinding white. "You asked for escape. I offer it. Just one name." The light quivered like something immense shifting within it. Something without form, but with weight. She could feel it, watching its presence pressing against her skin, reading every thought. Missy stepped forward. "No," Kathy whispered, pulling her back. "Don't move." But Missy looked at her calm and distant, like the house had already taken her dreams and replaced them with something smoother. She said, "I'm not afraid anymore." Kathy dropped to one knee, her hands cupping her daughter's face. "You should be. Fear means you're still fighting." Behind them, George stood again, but something had changed. His body shimmered, barely holding shape, parts of him flickering like static. His face was mostly his, but with shadows behind the eyes, like someone else was peering out from inside. "She doesn't lie," George said, voice layered now, his and hers in unison. "You want peace, choose." Then came the laughter. Not mocking, not cruel. Worse, understanding. The house understood them. It loved them in the way a spider loves the fly stuck in its web. Kathy gritted her teeth and stepped toward the light, pushing the door farther open. It didn't grow brighter. Instead, it breathed. And within the light, she saw a room, their living room, but untouched by the past month. Perfect. Sunlight through clean windows. George grilling on the porch. Missy playing on the floor. Christopher drawing. Daniel napping. Herself smiling, wine in hand. The life before. A hallucination. A temptation. The children gasped. They saw it too. The house was showing them a better version. A quiet trade. Stay. Submit. Forget. Kathy reached into her coat pocket and found the key again. The same blackened iron, always returning. She hurled it into the light. The illusion shimmered, then screamed. The house howled in rage. The front door slammed shut with a violence that knocked them backward. All the lights in the house exploded. The floor split in a jagged, yawning crack from foyer to fireplace. Through it came wind, no breath, a slow, pulsing inhale from deep underground. Kathy stood, blood on her lip, her arms shielding the children. "No more choices," she whispered. "We leave. Together." And then she remembered. The red room. The place Father Mancuso had warned about. The room that didn't appear on any plans. It was still here, waiting, buried in the basement. Kathy didn't wait. She gripped Daniel and Missy by the hand, grabbed Christopher by the sleeve, and charged back through the house. Every hallway resisted walls, narrowing door frames bending inward like clenched fists, the carpet rippling underfoot as though alive. But she pushed through breath, ragged skin prickling with each step. The door to the basement was waiting, not hidden now, open, stairs yawning into shadow-wet air breathing up from below. Kathy paused only a moment, eyes locked on the black. "Stay behind me," she told the kids. "Don't stop. No matter what you hear." They descended. Each step down felt like a heartbeat. The air thickened, humid and foul, like a crawl space beneath a slaughterhouse. The flashlight flickered, but held. Around them, the walls pulsed with moisture stone, oozing dark streaks, sometimes shifting when looked at too long. And then they reached the bottom. The basement was not as they remembered. No boiler, no shelves, no tools, only earth. The concrete had peeled back, revealing a chamber of packed dirt and twisted root. And at the far end, the red room. Not a door, not a structure, but a glowing outline burned into the wall itself. It throbbed, like something inside it had a pulse. George's voice echoed faintly behind them, distant but close enough to chill. "You're almost home." Kathy pressed forward, feeling the pull, now some invisible tide dragging them toward that burning outline. The children hesitated. Missy clung to her arm. "Mommy!" I hear her singing. Kathy closed her eyes. She heard it too. A lullaby. Old, southern, out of tune. The same melody that had played from Missy's music box before it went missing. The red outline split open a vertical tear in reality, and through it, a vision of outside, daylight, the driveway, the car, snow falling gently. It was their escape, but Kathy had learned. She reached into her pocket. No key, this time a bone, small, charred, a child's. She dropped it, and the doorway shrieked. The light twisted into flame, then black smoke. The illusion burned away. Behind it stood the truth. The red room was alive, its walls made of writhing limbs, hundreds of them, reaching outward in slow, grasping waves. The floor was a mouth wet and waiting, whispering with 10,000 voices in unison. "Come home, Catherine. You've always belonged here." The flashlight flickered, then died. Kathy turned to the children. "We run, now." But Christopher pointed, "Look." George stood inside the red room, smiling. Normal again, hand outstretched. "If you won't choose," he said, "she will." Behind him, something enormous uncoiled, something with too many arms and no face, and it reached for them. The thing in the red room unfolded like a spider stretching after centuries of sleep, limbs emerging from walls that weren't walls, more like flesh wrapped in wood grain. Its body was massive yet weightless, floating slightly above the ground as though carried on a breath no one could hear. No eyes, no mouth. Just a dark, pulsing void where a face should have been. It reached toward them, and George held out his hand. His voice came gently, too gently. "It won't hurt. Not if we give her what she needs." Kathy stepped back. "No, she needs a soul," he said. "Not a life, just a name. Let her forget the rest." Kathy tightened her grip on the children, fury overtaking fear. "You don't get to sell them. Not to this house. Not for your guilt." The red room pulsed brighter. Missy began to float, just an inch, her toes brushing the dirt. Her eyes rolled back, lips parting to whisper something. But Kathy grabbed her, yanked her down, and turned back toward the stairs. Blocked. The entrance had sealed. A solid wall of bone and brick. Trapped. But the voice followed. "There is another way." The house offered. It wasn't just a prison. It was a ritual. Every room, every crack, every choice, it had been leading them here. Kathy understood now. The house didn't feed on pain. It fed on willingness. It needed a sacrifice made with intention, and George had offered one. The children? She wouldn't. Kathy looked around. The floor, still breathing, still whispering, but beneath it pipes, not modern ones, old copper veins that hadn't carried water in years. She remembered the blueprints, the well. There was a tunnel beneath, a crawl space, old and rotted. If she could just break through. She pulled a broken beam from the wall and began to dig, hands blistering dirt, caking her arms. Christopher and Daniel followed without question, clawing at the soil. Missy stared, swaying slightly, eyes still caught in some invisible trance. George took a step forward. If you leave her hungry, she'll find someone else. She won't stop. Kathy didn't look up. Neither will I. Her fingers struck metal. A hollow ring. The pipe. She yanked. It came free with a hiss of stale air, and a crack split the floor. Not beneath them. Beneath George. The earth swallowed him whole. No scream. Just a soft inhale like the closing of a tomb. The red room flickered. The monster stilled. And then it wailed, a sound that made the dirt rise and fall like breath, a sound of loss, of anger. The pipe hole widened a tunnel now. Dark. Tight. But real. Kathy shoved the children in one by one, then followed. Behind her, the red room erupted. Flames of no color. A scream of no mouth. The house was mourning and hunting. The crawl space pressed around them like a coffin, but forward they crawled, toward the unknown. Toward maybe? The crawl space was impossibly tight, barely large enough for Kathy to move on elbows and knees. The air was ancient, thick with dust and the tang of rusted metal. Every breath burned her throat, and her shoulders scraped against root-tangled walls. Behind her, the children whimpered, but didn't cry. Not anymore. Even Missy was silent now. The tunnel stretched longer than it should have, far longer than the house's foundation. It bent, curved, turned on itself like a snake devouring its own tail. Somewhere behind them, the house groaned louder than ever before. The walls trembled. Cracks split the dirt ceiling, showering them with debris. And through the vibrations, she heard her. The house, the thing inside it, the she. She no longer whispered. She pleaded. Come back. Take the room. Let me be you. Kathy crawled faster. The light behind them had vanished. No going back. Just forward. Then the tunnel widened. Opened. A pocket chamber of damp stone. The children crawled out ahead of her, stumbling into the space. Kathy collapsed behind them, chest heaving. They were deep underground now, beneath even the basement, in some forgotten artery of the land itself. And in the center of the chamber stood the well, not metaphorical. The same well she had seen in visions, the one from the basement, but here complete, whole, its bricks slick with moss, its stones whispering in tongues she dared not understand. Missy walked toward it. Kathy grabbed her wrist. No, but the girl only stared at the rim. She's inside, Missy whispered. She's not angry anymore. The ground trembled. A crack split the wall behind the well, and light poured in, this time not false. Daylight, real, cold and gray like morning fog. An exit. Christopher scrambled toward it, followed by Daniel. But Missy stayed. She looked at Kathy with calm old eyes. She still needs one. Kathy crouched beside her, heartbreaking. No baby. She lies. She always lies. But Missy shook her head. She never asked to be made. Someone put her here. A long time ago. And she's still waiting to be forgiven. Tears welled in Kathy's eyes. What do you mean? Missy smiled faintly. You don't have to give her anyone. Just remember her. A final quake shook the room. The ceiling split. And for a moment, Kathy saw her, not the monster, but a woman. Tattered dress, eyes full of grief, standing in the well, arms out not to take but to be held. And Kathy did something strange. She reached forward and whispered, I see you. The shaking stopped. The air cleared. The light behind the crack widened into a tunnel. Kathy scooped Missy into her arms and ran. Upward. The soil was no longer closing around them. It parted, helping, as if the house at long last had loosened its grip. And when they broke the surface, cold air hit her face like baptism. Snow. Real. Trees. Dawn. They were outside. The house stood behind them. Dark, silent, watching, and then it exhaled, collapsed inward, not violently, not with rage, but like a creature finally allowed to rest. The roof folded, the walls bent, and in seconds it was gone. Only dirt remained, and the faint outline of a spiral burned into the frost. They stood in silence as the last wisps of dust curled upward from the place where the house had been. The cold morning wrapped around them like a forgotten coat, biting, but strangely welcome. The sun hadn't fully risen, only a dull haze beyond the trees. But after what they'd endured, it felt like a miracle. Kathy sank to her knees in the snow arms, wrapped tightly around all three children. They pressed into her wordless, exhausted. No one cried. Not yet. There was no energy left for fear or grief, only stillness. Christopher was the first to speak. "Where's Dad?" Kathy looked into his face, searching for how much he remembered. Everything. She saw it in his eyes, and she didn't lie. He made a choice, a bad one, but he saved us too, in the end. The boy nodded slowly. No anger, just quiet understanding that no child should ever have to bear. They sat like that for a long time, the sky lightening shade by shade. A soft breeze passed through the bare trees. Birds began to sing. It all felt real. No more visions, no more traps. Missy dozed against Kathy's shoulder, murmuring in her sleep. She had a name once. Kathy didn't press. Not now. She held her daughter tighter. A road lay just beyond the clearing, the same gravel path that had led them here weeks ago. A memory from a different life. Kathy rose slowly, legs aching, and gathered the children. They walked, one foot in front of the other. No words needed. They left the clearing, the house, the nightmare behind. But the memory followed, not like a ghost, more like a scar, or maybe a story waiting for the right moment to resurface. At the edge of the woods, Kathy paused, turned back one last time. The spiral in the snow was already fading beneath fresh flakes. Soon even that would disappear. But deep in the earth something remained. Quiet, watching. Not with hunger, not anymore, but with memory. And somewhere beyond the veil of what most people dared believe, she watched, too. Not the monster, the woman, the one who had never asked to be born. Kathy whispered, "Rest now." Then she and her children stepped onto the road and began the long walk home. The walk was longer than it should have been. The road stretched like taffy, winding between frost-covered trees that stood tall and still like silent sentinels guarding the edge of memory. The children said nothing. Their breaths came in little white clouds, their steps crunching softly on the gravel. Every so often, Kathy would glance back over her shoulder, half expecting the forest to shift the path to curl in on itself, like it had inside the house. But it didn't. The air was real. The cold bit deep, and her feet ached. After what felt like hours, they spotted the first sign of return, a rusted metal mailbox tilted on a crooked post. Beyond it, a paved road, and in the distance, a town. Cars. Life. Safety. Kathy didn't cry until she saw a gas station's flickering neon sign. She didn't even realize she'd stopped moving until Daniel tugged her sleeve. "Are we really out?" She knelt down, took his face in her hands, and said yes. But deep down, a voice whispered, "Not forever. Never forever." The world had accepted them back, but something fundamental had shifted, as if they had carried something with them. Missy clutched her doll again, one Kathy hadn't seen in days. It was cleaner now, almost new. No dirt, no torn seam. But its eyes. One of them was darker than before, and its head turned slightly as if listening. They walked into the gas station together. The attendant looked up, startled. "Everything all right?" Kathy opened her mouth to answer, but words failed. The man's eyes widened as he saw the dirt, the torn clothes, the hollow exhaustion carved into their faces. "I'll call someone," he said quickly, reaching for the phone. "You need help?" "Yes," Kathy whispered. "Please." An hour later, they sat in the back of an ambulance. The paramedics asked questions, basic ones, but for each Kathy had to choose how much truth to give. What had happened? Where had they been? Where was George? She gave just enough to satisfy the forms, just enough to stay grounded in this world. But when the youngest EMT leaned down to ask Missy her name, Missy only smiled and said, "She calls me Birdie now." Kathy froze. Birdie, her childhood nickname, one she hadn't spoken aloud in decades. Not since her mother's funeral. Not since the day Kathy had visited the farmhouse alone just before the sale and found that same well buried in the woods. A memory she'd buried. A name she'd left behind. The EMT chuckled, not understanding. "That's cute." But Kathy was staring at her daughter now, heart thudding. Missy blinked, and in her left eye, for the briefest moment, Kathy saw the reflection of the red room. Then it was gone. The ambulance drove on toward the hospital, toward the living. But somewhere beneath the frost-covered ground, under the place where the house had stood, something opened its eyes again, not with malice, but with recognition. The hospital was bright, sterile humming with fluorescent lights and distant monitors. Nurses moved quickly, efficiently, without asking too many questions. Trauma didn't need explanation. It wore itself plainly on skin, in posture, in the way eyes never seemed to focus quite right. Kathy and the children were admitted under exposure and psychological distress. Words that could mean anything and everything. A social worker came, kind eyes, clipboard in hand. She asked Kathy if she had somewhere to go. Family, friends. Kathy lied and said yes. The woman smiled gently and moved on. Christopher was given crayons and paper. He didn't draw houses or stick figures. He drew spirals, again and again. Spirals with eyes in the middle. Daniel slept, but twitched with each breath. Missy wouldn't let go of the doll. Doctors examined them, found no injuries, no bruises, no breaks, no signs of abuse. Physically, they were fine, but when Kathy closed her eyes even for a second, she felt the house breathing. She saw George's face, not twisted or possessed, just tired, just sad. That night in the hospital bed, she dreamed. She was back in the red room, only this time it was small, quiet, like a chapel. The woman was there, not monstrous, not reaching, just kneeling beside the well, humming to herself. Kathy walked forward, sat beside her. "Why us?" she asked. The woman didn't look up. "Because you remembered." Kathy frowned. The woman turned. Her face was soft, not young, but timeless. Her eyes were Kathy's own. "Because the world forgets. But you didn't. And so I watched. I waited. What do you want now?" The woman stood, placed a hand over Kathy's heart. "Not your fear, not your children, just your story." Kathy woke with a start. The room was dark. The monitors beeped softly. At the end of her bed, Missy sat cross-legged, the doll in her lap. "She's gone," the girl whispered. Kathy sat up. "Who?" "The house." She shook her head. "No, she's still there, but she's sleeping now." Missy looked down at the doll, then carefully set it on the chair. "I don't need her anymore." She climbed into bed beside Kathy, and for the first time in weeks, the little girl slept, deeply, peacefully. Outside, snow fell again, blanketing the town in quiet, and miles away in the woods where the house had once stood, the spiral in the earth vanished beneath white. But far below, in the roots of the land, the story curled in on itself, not dead, just waiting to be told again. Weeks passed. They stayed in a rented apartment, bland, temporary, safe. The kind with beige carpets and humming heaters where nothing creaked unless it should. The kids returned to school slowly. Daniel clung to Kathy's hand for the first few mornings. Christopher didn't speak much, but he started sleeping through the night. Missy no longer carried her doll. The spiral drawing stopped, almost. Kathy watched them closely, every detail. She cataloged subtle changes, eye twitches, cold spots, dreams they didn't remember, but woke crying from. She wrote them down in a notebook, not as a mother, but as a witness, because something still lingered. The social worker called twice more, asking about George. Kathy said he left. That was true enough. There was no record of him, no trace in town, as though the house had devoured not just his body, but the paperwork too. She took the children for walks in the woods some afternoons, far from the clearing. They never asked to go near it, and the few times a turn in the trail brought them close, Missy would stop walking. She didn't speak, just stared toward the trees and whispered. She's quieter now. One evening while folding laundry, Kathy found the doll again, not where Missy had left it. It sat upright on the windowsill facing out, one eye still darker than the other. She tossed it into a box in the closet and told herself it didn't matter. She lied. That night, the television turned on by itself. Static. No channel. No sound. Just snow. Kathy unplugged it. The screen stayed on. She sat across from it for over an hour, watching the shimmer, and in the faint moving lines, she saw the outline of the house flickering like an afterimage burned into her vision. Then it blinked away, gone. But the message was clear. It was never about brick or timber. The house had moved in, not into a new building. Into them. Into her. Missy drew again the next morning. But it wasn't a spiral. It was a woman, kneeling beside a well, and behind her, a house-shaped shadow curled around the trees. Missy held it up proudly. I gave her a new room, she said. Inside my dreams, Kathy nodded slowly and reached for her notebook. She began writing not in fear, but with purpose. If the house had become a story, then she would be the one to tell it. Shape it, seal it, keep it from escaping in pieces. Some things you survive by remembering, others only by containing. Spring came slowly that year. The snow receded in slushy waves, revealing brown earth and brittle grass beneath. In the apartment, Kathy kept the windows open during the day. Fresh air, light, anything to remind them that the world was still real. The children adapted faster than she expected. They laughed again, played again, but there were moments, small, quiet ones, when Kathy would see a shadow move just a half-second too late, or catch Missy staring at an empty corner with an expression far too old for her age. The house was gone, but its residue lingered. One night, she woke to the sound of whispering, not in her room, in the hallway. She crept out, careful not to wake the boys, and found Missy, standing at the end of the hall, barefoot in her nightgown, one hand resting against the dry wall. She was listening. Kathy whispered, "Sweetheart." Missy didn't turn. "She's talking to me," she said. "Not bad, just lonely." Kathy approached slowly, knelt beside her. "She's not in the house anymore," Kathy said carefully. "There's nothing left for her here." Missy finally looked up. "She says that's okay. She just wants to stay remembered. If someone forgets her completely, she gets loud again." Kathy placed a hand over her daughter's. Warm, solid, real. "Then we won't forget," she said. "But we don't have to let her in either." Missy nodded, and for the first time in a long while her eyes were just her own. Later that week, Kathy bought a journal with a red leather cover. She wrote in it every evening, not just the story of what happened, but dreams, symbols, patterns. She filled the first page with a spiral, then closed the book, locked it in a drawer, and taped the key beneath the drawer itself. If someone ever needed it again, they'd find it, but not easily. Not by accident. Life moved on. They moved to another town by summer, smaller, older, but untouched by the past. No one there knew their names. No one asked about the gaps in their story. And for the first time in months, Kathy began to breathe normally again. Missy started painting. Christopher joined a soccer team. Daniel talked in his sleep, but only nonsense. No more names, no more singing, just dreams. Sometimes late at night, Kathy would sit on the porch and sip tea as wind rustled the trees, and she would feel something out there, watching, not haunting, not even waiting, just witnessing. Because once a story has been told, it doesn't die. It just changes shape. Years passed. Seasons turned like pages in a book, long forgotten on a high shelf. Kathy aged quietly with grace carved from experience. The children grew, each one shaped but not broken by what they had endured. Christopher became a writer. Daniel studied architecture. Missy painted the things she saw only in dreams, things she never fully explained but always captured in color and curve. They never returned to Amityville. The land where the house had stood became overgrown. Surveyors marked it once for development, but the sale never went through. The ground wouldn't hold structure. Foundations cracked, pipes burst, rumors spread. People said the soil was bad. They weren't wrong, but the truth had faded to whispers, like all legends do. Kathy still kept the red journal. It lived in the back of a drawer beneath sweaters and old photos unopened for years. She never wrote in it again after the last entry, a short sentence on a yellowed page. If she returns, let her be heard, not feared. One evening, long after the children had moved out, Kathy stood in her garden, trimming lavender under a dusky sky. The breeze was gentle. The birds were silent. And in the distant wind, just for a moment, she heard it. A lullaby, the same broken melody that had haunted their nights. Soft, almost kind. She looked up. Across the fence, a little girl stood watching. Straw-colored hair, bare feet in the grass. She held a doll, one eye darker than the other. Kathy didn't move, didn't speak. The girl smiled and vanished. Not like a ghost, but like breath on glass. Kathy exhaled, not in fear, but in understanding. The story hadn't ended, but it had changed. That night she opened the red journal again and began to read, not to remember, but to remind the story that it still lived. And as the pages turned, the wind picked up. carrying the scent of old wood, of soil, of something ancient and watching. The spiral turns, but now she was ready. Whatever came next, she would meet it not as prey, but as witness, as keeper, as the one who remembers. And now, as we reach the quiet end of our journey, let's take a moment to breathe. You've walked with Kathy and her children through shadows and silence, through a house that wasn't just haunted, but hungry. You've seen how fear lingers, not just in walls, but in memories, in choices, in names whispered too softly. The Amityville house is gone, yes, but its story remains. And in remembering it gently, we soften its edges. Let your body sink a little deeper now. Feel the bed beneath you solid and still. Let the hush of the room surround you. Whatever tension may have crept into your shoulders, release it now. You're safe. The house cannot reach you here. Inhale slowly and exhale even slower. Think of spirals not as traps, but as paths winding inward toward stillness, toward calm. Let the quiet guide you now, far from creaking stairs and red rooms. Let your breath become the only sound. Let the dark hold you like a soft blanket. You are the storyteller now, and your dreams are yours to shape.